Bill, we're very pleased to have you on Alternative Views tonight, and I think we're going to have an opportunity to tell our audience all the things that they wanted to know but were afraid to ask about smoking, cigarettes, the tobacco industry, because you've been researching these topics for years and have come up with all sorts of new information that's generally not known to the public. So let's begin by telling some of those people that are puffing out in the audience what are in those weeds that they are getting such pleasure from.
Well, they are getting a lot of pleasure out of their cigarettes. In fact, each person who has a favorite brand is getting his own specific brand of pleasure. For one thing, because each brand has a patented set of chemicals in it, which generically in the industry are known as smoker satisfaction chemicals. And they are specifically designed to be mildly physiologically addictive, as well as to be to acclimatize the taste of the smoker to the particular taste of the brand. It's the reason why if a smoker of brand A runs out of brand A and bums brand B off a friend, that might last for a little while, but as soon as that smoker of brand A can get to the machine, he'll go ahead and buy brand A again. He's addicted to it.
You know, I've talked to people since we talked several weeks ago. I've just checked, smokers, I say, do you ever try any other cigarettes? And he said, I try this other cigarettes, but they sure don't taste good. I like my own brand.
Exactly.
I guess
exactly.
And that's just one. What is it that they're addicted to? Is it the tobacco or these specific chemicals?
Well, there's a whole set of answers to your question, unfortunately, and I'll try to keep it short. For one thing, certainly they're addicted to nicotine. Nicotine is a component of cigarettes. Mostly nowadays, the nicotine that's in there is not in there as a result of being on a natural tobacco leaf. It's in there because the manufacturers have incorporated it as an ingredient in the synthetic smoking materials that most cigarettes are made out of now. Then, of course, there's a form of addiction that's generally not discussed with cigarettes, but it's a real factor, and that is that cigarettes contain so many extremely toxic ingredients that are put in there as a result of manufacturing decisions. They're not in any natural tobacco that may have somehow found its way into the cigarette. So there's a toxic addiction. When you take a small amount of a highly toxic substance into your body on a chronic, sublethal basis, your body develops an addiction to it. You stop ingesting that toxic chemical, and your body will go through withdrawal. Withdrawal pleasure.
What are some of these things that they put in?
Well, for instance, one of the main areas of contamination in cigarettes is the solvents utilized to drive the flavoring chemicals and the aroma chemicals and the smoker satisfaction chemicals into the cellulose of the synthetic smoking material. They have to carry those chemicals into this alpha cellulose, which is recycled municipal waste, recycled forest industry product waste, that kind of stuff. It's basically basic cellulose. So they have to use solvents to carry these flavoring chemicals and so forth into the alpha cellulose. They use things like benzene, toluene, and cyclohexane. They also use one of the more common solvents, and I have copies of the patents for the utilization of this, is phosgene.
That's nerve gas.
That's exactly right. It's a very effective solvent as well. And residues of it remain in the alpha cellulose after processing is through. And so when the cigarette is smoked, when this synthetic smoking material is burned, in addition to the release of chemicals that naturally accompany the combustion of organic materials, you get release of such things as phosgene and benzene and
well, now benzene, that's a known carcinogen too.
Precisely, yeah, exactly. One of the main reasons that the cigarette industry, and we need to distinguish between the cigarette industry and the tobacco industry, but one of the main reasons that they are able to say it's never been effectively proven or scientifically proven that cigarettes cause cancer or heart disease and so forth. Well, it actually hasn't ever been scientifically proven. And that's primarily because the cigarettes that are utilized by NIH and all the other testing organizations in conducting their rat skin painting tests and all that sort of thing are especially supplied to them by the tobacco industry. And they're University of Kentucky standard 100 millimeter cigarettes, and they are composed of pure tobacco. There's no synthetic smoking material, there's no benzene, there's none of the processing chemicals utilized in these cigarettes that are smoked by the machines and then painted on the mouse skins and so forth. So there's an elaborate set of reasons why the tobacco industry, or pardon me, the cigarette industry is still, in the face of common sense, able to maintain this this glib, disingenuous attitude of, well, nobody's really proved it.
Well, in fact, there's many different kinds of tobacco and even pesticide residues that get into cigarettes. It's not the
Exactly.
pure, sweet leaf that you sometimes see in the South, you know,
Yeah.
hanging up to dry.
And you see in all the ads.
Right, and you see in all the ads. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about junk tobacco and
You
the way
bet.
that pesticide residues
You bet.
get into tobacco and add to the poison here.
Well, in addition to synthetic materials, synthetic smoking materials, which today comprise a large portion of most brands of cigarettes, you have what's called reconstituted sheet, appropriately named. And it's composed of roots and stems and trash, tobacco trash, brought into this country by the cigarette manufacturers, primarily from third world sources. And utilized, it's ground up into a fine powder, and it's incorporated along with glues and flavoring chemicals and so forth into a sheet that looks like a piece of plywood or a particle board, which is then shaved in giant mills. And that's, if a person who's smoking cares to, and a lot of people would rather not know, which is one of the reasons that perhaps sets are clicking at this very moment. But for those who are listening who care to, take a cigarette, cut it apart, and look at those little golden curls under magnification, and you'll see that they're not parts of leaves. There's no veins in them, you know. But what you can see is you can see they're composed of little fine particles. That's ground up roots and stems. Those tobacco plants in the third world where they were originally raised were sprayed with all kinds of pesticides. I have research that has been done in Europe that indicates that there are dozens of pesticides, many of which are totally banned in this country.
Like
DDT, chloridane, heptachlor, toxaphene, dieldrin, aldrin, endrin, on and on. Endosulfan, a wide range of pesticides that have known fetus damaging effects. They are chemicals that are specifically designed not to kill bugs, because bugs generally in the tropics now, you can't poison them. They're immune to poisons. So you have to go after them genetically, and these chemicals are designed either to go after the adult bugs to mess up their reproductive systems, or the third level of pesticides being used and getting onto tobacco and getting into the roots and stems and being brought in and made into remanufactured sheet in this country. There are even chemicals designed specifically to produce non-viable insect offspring.
And this works then, it's magic through cigarettes into people then?
We don't know, but I think it's really unlikely that all the damage to fetuses being experienced by smoking mothers is due to carbon monoxide and nicotine.
You think it's these chemicals as well?
Well, I think it's reasonable to assume that if you're ingesting 6 different chemicals and 3 of them are known fetus damagers and carcinogens, and 3 others you don't know what they are, they may or may not be, I think it makes sense to focus on the things that you know are there.
What about filters? Are filters on the cigarettes able to keep some of these poisons and tars and nicotine from entering the body?
In some cases, certain types of filters, yes. The governments of Europe, the governments of the European Economic Community have for the last 20 years recognized that this is a really severe problem, pesticides in cigarettes. And they have extensive regulations in place in Europe. In fact, you cannot bring tobacco into Europe for manufacture into cigarettes that has DDT contamination, that has any endrin on it. Most of the organochlorine pesticides are totally banned in Europe on tobacco products. And as a consequence, any smoker knows. You smoke brand A in the U.S. and you go to Europe and buy brand A at the airport and in the train station or wherever. It tastes very different, and that's because it's made with tobacco, for one thing. Relatively little reconstituted tobacco is present in European cigarettes, simply because they can't get enough uncontaminated material to make the cheap substitute with, so they have to use the real thing.
What about other tobacco products like cigars or snuff and
Right.
chewing tobacco?
Well, in terms of pesticides, each has its own specific kind of danger. Cigars, for instance, the really good cigars, wrapped in real, genuine tobacco leaf. Remember, I mentioned before the program that one of the things about tobacco is it's very high in sugar. And insects, of course, are very attracted to plants that are high in sugar and high in protein. Consequently, when you're raising cigar leaf tobacco in the tropics, you have a real serious problem with insects biting holes in it, and that makes it unacceptable as wrapper leaf. Even worse, you have a problem with snails and slugs. So there's a wide range of snail and slug killers, which usually incorporate heavy metals, that are utilized on cigar wrapper leaf tobacco. Methanol, if you're familiar with pesticides, is probably the most common and highest level contaminant of cigar leaves. Chewing tobacco, snuff, wet snuff, which a lot of young people are turning to, particularly as an alternative to smoking, is extraordinarily dangerous from the standpoint of oral cavity cancer, primarily because several of the pesticides used in the production of the junk tobacco, basically, the trash tobacco that's used to make this stuff, are very high in things like NDELA, which is a known oral cavity carcinogen. There is an extreme danger, really, in using this wet snuff. This Sean Marcy case up in Oklahoma that was just lost a few months back. If his mother and his lawyer had had access to this information, they should have tried the case in a whole different area, because the manufacturers are guilty of knowing that these chemicals are present in cigarettes and tobacco so-called products.
Now, how have you gotten all this information?
A lot of Freedom of Information Act, a lot of just plain reading industry literature. The industry is totally unregulated. They don't have to comply to any federal or state regulations with regard to what they put in their products or what their products are contaminated with. So they chatter back and forth a great deal in their technical papers. I have a list of a computer list sent to me by EPA, and this is a printout of all the tobacco industry studies done on the effects of pesticides in creating off-taste. They're very concerned about consumer acceptance problems.
Oh, they don't care about the health problems, they're worried about the taste.
Well, they don't study the health problems,
Uh-huh.
because if they did study the health problems, then it could be said that they knew about them.
So what does off-taste mean?
Oh, if it tastes any different than what the consumer is accustomed to. Each brand has a very specific set of taste buds it goes after, and a very specific set of aromas. In fact, there are specific chemicals in there designed to give you that first aroma that comes out of the pack when you open it. That's a specific chemical in each brand or set of chemicals. Then when you pull the cigarette out and put it in your mouth, there's another set of chemicals that are designed to draw you further into the use of the product. It's a very well thought through product.
Bill, you mentioned that in Europe they had regulation in the tobacco industry against using pesticides on tobacco.
Exactly.
And that the industry is not regulated in the United States
Precisely.
to oversee any of these things you're talking about that are in cigarettes. Why is this the case? We think of ourselves as a modern, progressive society. How come we're so far behind the rest of the world in regulating the cigarette industry? That's
a good question without an answer that can be given authoritatively, but I can point to a couple of things. The tobacco industry built America. I mean, tobacco money provided the capital for the maintenance and development of the majority of the first colonies, and tobacco as a trade item was extraordinarily important. It earned its producers vast sums of money that were instrumental in developing the United States, really. It has in terms of a corporate product, the tobacco industry has the cigarette industry has the highest internal rate of return on invested capital of any industry anywhere. I mean, it's just simply number one by a long margin. The diversification of the capital that's been earned by the cigarette companies over the last half century has brought them into ownership of just about everything that you can think of on just about any level. They're not into being obvious empire builders, so you don't see organization charts really very often. But inside the tobacco industry, I've pieced together an ownership network of the capital. And it penetrates a long way. For instance, the Mary Babcock Reynolds Foundation is a prime funder of Ralph Nader's Public Citizen Group.
And that's tobacco related?
Oh yeah, Reynolds.
Oh, Reynolds, okay.
Yeah, sorry. I should have been more.
And has Ralph never done an expose of the cigarette industry?
Actually, I went through a very interesting back and forth with the editor of Public Citizen about a year and a half ago. He wanted to do a sizable expose based on this information.
That's the Nader magazine.
The Nader magazine, right. But when it rose to the level of the editorial board, Dr. Sidney Wolfe, who is their principal medical authority, I was told that his objection to doing the story was, why raise the issue that might lead people to say, well, maybe it isn't the tobacco that's causing all the trouble, maybe it's all these chemicals, and so maybe smoking tobacco would be okay, which is part of my premise, really. I'm not certain that smoking tobacco is that bad for people who want to smoke tobacco.
But it's the cigarette industry. Frank, I might note that we interviewed George Seldes on Alternative Views, who wrote In Fact. That was the first U.S. magazine to explore some of the dangers of tobacco, or rather cigarette smoking. And Seldes said that no other magazine, journal, or newspaper in the United States would publish an article critical of the cigarette industry because of the amount of advertising that went into all of these different media from the cigarette industry. That was one of the major, spenders of advertising revenue, along with, I think, alcohol and cars. And so none of these dangerous industries could be investigated simply because whoever did that would lose advertising revenue.
Even more conspiratorial, if you want to see things on that level, which it's often hard not to. The fact is that it's not just cigarette advertising that controls the media. The cigarette companies own alcohol, they own food processing, they own transportation, they own a great deal of media itself, they own food processing companies. So in other words, if a magazine or a piece of print media or electronic media is about to do something that is effectively dangerous to the industry, the advertising pressure can come from all kinds of directions. I mean, Del Monte is owned by R.J. Reynolds. I mean,
it's one of the biggest food conglomerates in the world.
Sure, and how many Del Monte ads are in a magazine? And Kentucky Fried Chicken, Hubline. I'm just.
And what about Congress? I mean, we know about Jesse Helms being the tobacco.
Well, he's the clown up front, designed to keep us from understanding the depth to which tobacco money really controls and penetrates. You don't. In terms of Congress, I haven't seen anybody yet who is willing to take on not just the cigarette industry, but the economic power that the industry in all of its aspects represents. But the fact is that 350,000 people a year are dying of smoking cigarettes. We've got untold numbers of babies being destroyed from birth by cigarettes. We've got tremendous social and economic costs, the equivalent of 3 747s crashing a day, and it's an industry that is in effect been given license by the government to produce a product that's doing this. In other words, the government knows very well what the position of the European governments is on the issue of pesticides, because our tobacco farmers raise the tobacco that's made into cigarettes in Europe, because we have strong pesticide regulations in America. So the American government, the Department of Commerce, Department of Agriculture, help U.S. farmers, tobacco farmers, raise relatively pesticide-free tobacco to meet European standards, while at the same time allowing the cigarette industry to bring in third world tobacco for manufacture into cigarettes that Americans are smoking. And everybody along the way knows what's going on, but nobody's dealing with the issue. There's never been a single study of the effects of pesticides in tobacco or cigarette products by any of the major U.S. health research foundations.
Well,
not one.
How do you explain this? I mean, you told about the strange conditions of the scientific quote-unquote experiments using just pure tobacco rather than what people really smoke.
Right.
You would think there would be universities or independent health agencies or scientists who would do some more serious investigations. Why is this?
There's been one. His name is Dr. Dietrich Hoffmann. He was the head of Sloan Kettering's Cancer Research Institute. When Dr. Hoffmann started doing research on the role of pesticide chemicals in oral cavity cancer in wet snuff tours, he, within 12 months, for a variety of reasons, was no longer with Sloan Kettering. apparently had an extremely hard time finding any place to get his research published. He is now working full-time for the Dana Family Foundation in Valhalla, New York, of all places, in the American Health Foundation, and continuing to do research into the role of pesticides in oral cavity cancer. But all his research is being published in Europe and in Russia and China. He speaks all over the world, but he can't speak in the U.S. Nobody wants to hear him.
So there really is a conspiracy.
I don't know. You can't see the conspiracy. All you can see is the results of, and you can infer there must be something going on.
Well, you mentioned trying to get your information in the Nader publication. What about other print media or electronic media? Have you had any luck in getting them?
No, I really haven't. A number of TV shows, commercial television people have heard about the research I've been doing, have approached me, have shot a lot of tape, edited it out, had visions of awards, I'm sure, for revealing this terrible, dark, murderous conspiracy, and then nothing has happened. When it's risen to the level of editorial on the station, and this happened with a station in Houston, and it's happened with several other stations. On the level of print media, it's very interesting. I'm a published author. I guess I've sold probably about 1 million books in my lifetime. And 1 million of my books have sold. I won't say I've sold. But I have a good agent, a New York agent. And he took my manuscript to the Frankfurt Book Fair, where, and he got a call from World Health Organization in Geneva. They flew him down, and they said, if you can find a publisher who will publish this book anywhere, we will vet it for you. We'll provide the people to vet it to make sure there's no technical mistakes.
Check it out.
Vet a manuscript, check it out. Make sure that there's nothing inaccurate in there that technically that can be seized upon as an excuse to criticize it. Right. They said that their World Health Organization is very aware of the problem. They consider it a major, major problem. But for various reasons, no government organization can address it either. So I was real pleased that you guys and you should check under the hoods of your car tonight, as I will. And,
well, we can get you British publishers. I mean, we have contacts with a lot of presses in England that would probably be happy to publish.
It seems to me it's a supreme irony here. We're talking about all the bad stuff that smoking tobacco, etc., or what people think is tobacco will do to you. And yet, on the other hand, I've read articles where it says that pure tobacco can be one of the greatest boons to mankind because in its role as food.
Well, there's been a lot of research in that area, and it's a couple of things to say that maybe will keep that from sounding so strange. Tobacco is an extremely high protein plant. In terms of plant proteins, it's more complete than corn or beans or anything else. And young tobacco, when it's just a green shoot, is extremely high in sugars as well. Animals love it. In tobacco country, you can't keep rabbit and deers, and other grazing animals, cattle, out of your tobacco beds. So the notion that tobacco is if you treat tobacco as just another plant, then you can sort of get away from the idea that, well, wouldn't it kill you to eat it? Because it won't. And what you're talking about, Frank, is a series of experiments that have extracted protein in its pure form from tobacco and utilized it in feeding experiments. And it's been very successful. And there's a man in North Carolina, chairman of the crop science department there, who's been raising tobacco just for that purpose. He's been raising biomass. How much tobacco can I get on an acre? And he's achieved yields of 200 metric tons an acre a year of tobacco, very high in protein. And he's almost got enough protein out of an acre of tobacco that it's cost competitive with dried eggs, which are a major source of protein in animal feed and so forth.
Well, this goes back to a lot of Indian customs. Wasn't tobacco a major part of a whole lot of economies?
Yeah, it really was.
Different people all over the world.
It was considered a gift of the Great Spirit, one of the 4 great gifts, and it was tobacco is a very powerful plant. It's got a very powerful plant spirit. The Hindu concept of deva spirits in plants, the deva spirit in tobacco is an extraordinary one. I've had Indian tobacco plants that I've grown that I've cut off at the soil line when they were blooming in the fall, and then I've hung them upside down in a dark basement without water, dry atmosphere, for 6 months, and come into the basement and they'd be turned up at the tip and blooming. And the seeds I was growing were out of a grave that was 800 years old. And I got 50% germination. So it's a remarkable plant in a lot of respects.
But it's one that's been severely abused by the cigarette industry.
Exactly.
That mixes all these chemicals and pesticides and synthetics in there. But what can be done about this? There have been some product liability suits. People have sued the tobacco companies because they claimed that it killed their relatives from cancer or whatever. What has been the fate of that, and how do you see these cases?
It's really been sad because over 300 product liability cases have come to trial and gone through trial in the past approximately 10 years. And every single one has been won by the tobacco companies. I am not a legal scholar, but it seems to me from looking at the cases, and I've read as many of them as I could get a hold of, none of the trial testimony concerned raising the kinds of issues that I've brought out in this research, which would be really important if you were wanting to establish the company's liability for producing an unreasonably dangerous product. Most testimonies concentrated on one line, which is this industry is manufacturing products that contain an addictive material, and my client got addicted to using these harmful products, and since he couldn't stop, the harmfulness of the product harmed my client, and therefore the company's liable. And that line doesn't wash as far as product liability law goes. What you have to be able to do is you have to be able to prove that a manufacturer, knowingly or unknowingly, manufactured an unreasonably dangerous product, and that you were in some way or another deprived of information which would have made a difference in your decision to use the product. And nobody's been able to prove that with regard to the tobacco industry. Pardon me. I keep saying it. I'm an example of the fundamental, subtle perception that keeps us from doing something about this industry. I keep saying the tobacco industry. They're not. They're not tobacco.
It's the cigarette
It's
industry.
The cigarette industry, the chemical stick
industry.
industry.
Poison industry. It sounds like they know that there's these poisons.
Oh, they do.
And toxic material.
Toxic, carcinogenic, fetus damaging, all different forms of biological damage.
Well, ultimately, what would you propose doing about this? Obviously, you want to get information out to the public. So in product liability suits, there can be judgments against the tobacco industries that will cause some problems for them. But what is your ultimate solution here?
Well, my ultimate solution, I would like to see something modeled on the Nuremberg trials. I think the cigarette industry is too multinational and too powerful to be effectively tried by any single government, just like the Nazi fascist movement was too international, to be tried by any one government. I think that the industry's assets should be stripped from it, and I think that they should be distributed to those who've been injured, and then should be put in a trust fund for those who will continue to be injured over time by this. But I also think that that an awful lot of people have a right to smoke tobacco, and I think a lot of people would enjoy having a tobacco product that they could smoke. And there's certainly a great many farmers in this country and around the world who for whom growing tobacco is what they know. Now, that tobacco doesn't wind up in the cigarettes, and what happens to it's another long story. But there's too many long stories involved in this whole issue. But I do think the industry needs to be disassembled, and I think that in its place, a new industry needs to be erected based on small farm production of a high-quality smoking product for people who want to smoke.